My wife chose her brother's birthday over the funeral of my mother. When I broke the tragic news, my wife calmly replied, "Today is my brother's birthday. I can't come." I ended things on the spot. 6 months later, one headline about me sent my wife and her family into absolute panic when they learned I had. My name is Logan Pierce, and I'm about to tell you how my whole damn world came crashing down on what should have been just another Tuesday in October. I'm 38 years old, and until last year, I genuinely believed I had my shit together. Nice house in the suburbs, decent job in tech, and a wife who looked good on my arm at company parties. Clarissa Pierce. Well, she was Clarissa Benton before she married me, and honestly, looking back now, she never really stopped being a Benton. The Bentons are old money. Not like Rockefeller old, but old enough that they've got portraits of dead relatives hanging in their dining room and a country club membership that's been passed down through 3 generations. They're the kind of family that measures success by how many people show up to their charity galas and whether their name gets mentioned in the society pages of the local paper. Everything's about appearances, about maintaining this perfect image that says we matter to a world that probably doesn't give a crap either way. I should have seen the red flags from day one, but love makes you stupid sometimes. When I first met Clarissa at a friend's wedding 5 years ago, she was this stunning brunette in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She laughed at my jokes, seemed genuinely interested when I talked about my work developing logistics software, and when she kissed me goodnight after our first date, I thought maybe I'd hit the jackpot. Maybe this beautiful, sophisticated woman could actually see something in a regular guy, like me who grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment with a single mom who worked double shifts at the hospital just to keep the lights on. For a while, it felt real. We'd spend weekends exploring little towns outside the city, trying hole-in-the-wall restaurants that served the best damn barbecue you've ever tasted. Clarissa would laugh when I got sauce on my shirt, and she'd steal bites of my fries even though she'd ordered a salad. Those were the moments I fell for her, the unguarded ones when she wasn't performing for anyone, wasn't worried about who might be watching or judging. But slowly, things started to change. The spontaneous weekend trips became planned events with reservations at trendy restaurants where you needed to dress up and pretend the tiny portions were artfully crafted. Our conversations shifted from dreams and random thoughts to guest lists and seating arrangements for dinner parties I never remembered agreeing to host. She started correcting the way I pronounced certain words, suggesting I might want to upgrade my wardrobe, and making little comments about how we should really consider joining the country club because networking is so important for career advancement. The worst part was how she talked about my mom. Mom was this incredible woman who'd raised me on her own after my dad bailed when I was 12. She worked as a nurse, pulling night shifts and double overtime to make sure I had everything I needed. She taught me how to change a tire, how to cook a decent meal, and most importantly, how to treat people with respect regardless of what they had in their bank account. When Clarissa met her, she was polite enough, but I could see it in her eyes. That subtle judgment, that slight stiffening when Mom would tell stories about our old neighborhood or mention shopping at discount stores. "Your mother is sweet," she'd say later, "but don't you think she might be more comfortable if we met at restaurants instead of having her over to the house?" The house that Mom had helped me pick out, by the way, spending an entire Saturday driving around looking at places and pointing out which ones had good bones and which ones were just pretty facades hiding structural problems. I tried to bridge the gap between these two worlds I was living in. I'd take Clarissa to my mom's place for Sunday dinners, hoping she'd see what I saw. The warmth, the genuine laughter, the way Mom would make sure everyone had seconds and thirds of her famous pot roast. But Clarissa would sit there looking like she was enduring some kind of trial, making polite conversation but checking her phone every few minutes and finding excuses to leave early. Meanwhile, when we'd go to Benton family gatherings, I felt like an outsider looking in through a window. They'd talk about their latest vacation to Europe or debate the merits of different private schools for kids they didn't even have yet. Arthur Benton, Clarissa's father, would give me these firm handshakes and ask about my little software project in a tone that made it clear he didn't consider it a real business. Clarissa's mother would smile sweetly and ask if I'd given any thought to expanding my professional network or if I might be interested in joining the Rotary Club. But I loved Clarissa. Or at least, I loved the woman I thought she was underneath all that Benton polish. I kept telling myself that once we settled into married life, once she felt more secure, she'd relax back into the person I'd fallen for. I convinced myself that her family's influence was just surface-level stuff, that deep down, she shared the same values I did about what really mattered in life. Then last October happened. The call came at 6 in the morning. Mom had collapsed at work. Massive heart attack. The doctors said it was quick, that she probably didn't suffer much, but that didn't make the hole in my chest feel any smaller. I sat in that hospital chair staring at machines that had gone quiet, holding her hand that was already getting cold, and the only thing I could think about was how I needed to call my wife. I needed Clarissa to come down here and help me figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. I called her from the hospital parking lot, my hands shaking so bad I could barely dial the number. When she picked up, I could hear music in the background, people laughing and talking. "Logan, you sound terrible. What's wrong?" "Mom's gone," I said, and saying it out loud made it real in a way that felt like getting punched in the gut. "She had a heart attack at work. Clarissa, she's dead." There was this pause. Not the kind of pause where someone's processing devastating news, but the kind where someone's calculating something in their head. "Oh no," she said, and her voice had that careful tone she used when she was trying to sound appropriately sympathetic. "Logan, I'm so sorry. That's terrible." I waited for her to say she was coming. I waited for her to ask which hospital, what she could do, how I was holding up. Instead, she said the words that would replay in my head for months afterward. "Today is Ryan's birthday party, though. I can't come right now. Can we talk about arrangements tomorrow?" Ryan, her 31-year-old brother, who didn't even like birthday parties, who told me just last month that he thought the whole celebration thing was ridiculous now that he was past 30. Ryan, who was perfectly capable of having a birthday without his sister holding his hand through it. That was the moment something fundamental broke inside me. Not cracked, broke. Clean through, like a bone snapping under too much pressure. "Don't worry about it," I told her, and hung up the phone. I sat there in my car in the hospital parking lot, staring at my phone, waiting for it to ring again. Waiting for her to call back and say she'd been in shock, that of course she was coming, that nothing was more important than being there for her husband when his world had just collapsed. The phone never rang. That's when I finally understood what my mother had been trying to tell me all along, in her gentle way. Love isn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts or looking good together in photos. Love is about showing up. It's about being there when everything falls apart, when life gets messy and inconvenient and real. And Clarissa had just chosen cake and party balloons over showing up for the man she'd promised to love through better or worse. Something broke in me that day, all right. But looking back now, I think it might have been the thing that needed breaking. The funeral home smelled like cheap air freshener trying to mask something nobody wanted to think about too hard. I'd spent the last 3 days making arrangements that felt surreal. Picking out a casket, choosing flowers, writing an obituary for the woman who'd been my entire world for 38 years. Every decision felt like I was sleepwalking through someone else's nightmare, hoping I'd wake up and find Mom bustling around her kitchen, probably making way too much food for just the two of us like she always did. I kept checking my phone those first couple of days, thinking maybe Clarissa would call. Maybe she'd realize what a colossal screw-up she'd made and try to fix things. Maybe she'd show up at the funeral home while I was meeting with the director, or send flowers with some kind of explanation that would make sense of why her brother's birthday party mattered more than her husband losing his mother. But my phone stayed quiet, and the only flowers that showed up were the ones I'd ordered myself. The morning of the funeral, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror trying to tie a tie with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. It was the black one Mom had bought me for my wedding. "Every man needs a good tie for important occasions," she'd said, and the irony wasn't lost on me that I was wearing it to bury her. I kept messing up the knot, starting over, getting more frustrated each time until I finally just gave up and left it hanging loose around my neck. I got to the funeral home an hour early because I couldn't stand sitting in that empty house anymore. The director, a soft-spoken guy named Mr. Henderson who'd probably comforted 1,000 grieving families, walked me through everything one more time. Where I'd sit, when I'd speak, how the whole thing would flow. He kept asking if my wife would be joining us, if there was anything special she wanted included in the service, and each time I had to say she won't be coming. It felt like swallowing glass. People started arriving around 10:30. I watched from the little side room as they filed in, and honestly, I was blown away by how many showed up. There were nurses from Mom's hospital, women and men who'd worked alongside her for years, who knew her terrible jokes and her habit of bringing homemade cookies for the night shift. Mrs. Patterson from next door, who'd been borrowing cups of sugar from Mom for the past 15 years and always returned them with interest in the form of her legendary banana bread. My old high school football coach, Mr. Riley, who Mom had basically adopted after his wife passed away 2 years ago. There were people I didn't even recognize at first, former patients' families who remembered how Mom had stayed late to hold someone's hand, or made sure they got extra blankets when the hospital was being stingy with comfort. One woman, probably in her 70s, came up to me with tears in her eyes and said, "Your mother sat with me all night when my husband was dying. She didn't have to do that. It wasn't her job, but she stayed anyway, and I'll never forget that kindness." That's when it really hit me. All these people had shown up for Mom. They'd rearranged their schedules, taken time off work, driven across town on a Thursday morning because they wanted to say goodbye to a woman who'd made their lives a little bit better just by being in them. But my own wife, the person who was supposed to be my partner through all of life's ups and downs, couldn't be bothered to show up. The service itself was beautiful in that quiet, painful way that funerals can be. I got up to speak and somehow managed to get through the eulogy I'd written at 3 in the morning, fueled by grief and too much coffee. I talked about Mom's laugh, how she could find something funny in almost any situation. I talked about her hands, always busy, always helping, whether she was bandaging a scraped knee or kneading dough for Sunday dinner. I talked about how she'd taught me that being a good person wasn't about having money or status or the right connections, but about showing up for the people who mattered. As I was speaking, I kept glancing at the back of the room, some stupid part of me still hoping Clarissa might slip in at the last minute, that she'd realize how wrong she'd been and at least try to make it right. But the seat next to mine stayed empty, and when I looked out at all those faces, people who'd loved my mother, people who'd been touched by her kindness, I felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. After the service, we caravanned to the cemetery. It was one of those perfect October days that Mom would have loved. Crisp air, leaves just starting to turn, the kind of weather that made you want to rake up a pile of leaves just so you could jump in them. We stood around her grave as the pastor said a few final words, and I watched them lower the casket into the ground. That's when it really hit me that she was gone. Not just gone from the hospital, not just gone from her house, but gone. Forever gone. People came up to me afterward, shaking my hand, giving me hugs, sharing memories. Mrs. Patterson pressed a casserole dish into my hands and made me promise to eat something. Coach Riley gave me his number and said to call if I needed anything at all. These people, Mom's people, were trying to take care of me the way she would have wanted them to. I drove home in a daze, that casserole dish on the passenger seat where Clarissa should have been sitting. The house felt different when I walked in, emptier somehow, like losing Mom had changed the air pressure or something. I sat on the couch still wearing that black tie, still holding my phone, and that's when I finally sent the message I should have sent 3 days earlier. Don't bother coming home. 6 words. That's all it took to end 8 years together. Not the big dramatic fight I'd always imagined, not some screaming match about money or kids, or whose turn it was to take out the trash. Just 6 words sent from a quiet living room to a woman who'd chosen party planning over supporting her husband through the worst day of his life. She texted back within minutes. 3 words that somehow managed to be even more devastating than her absence had been. You're being emotional. I stared at that message for a long time. Emotional. Like grief was some kind of character flaw. Like wanting your wife to show up when your mother dies was an unreasonable expectation. Like 8 years of marriage should have earned me at least the courtesy of her presence at a funeral. I turned off my phone and went to change the locks. Because Mom had taught me something important, even if I'd forgotten it for a while. You don't waste time on people who won't show up when it matters. And Clarissa had just proven, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that she wasn't going to show up. Not for me. Not when it really counted. The funeral was over, but in a lot of ways, that was just the beginning of everything else. The locksmith showed up at 7 in the morning, probably wondering why some guy in wrinkled clothes and 3 days of stubble needed his locks changed on a Friday. I didn't offer any explanations, just stood there drinking coffee that tasted like ash and watching him work. Each turn of his drill felt like I was sealing off more than just a door. I was closing the book on a whole chapter of my life that had turned out to be written in disappearing ink. By noon, I had 3 suitcases packed and loaded into my car. 8 years of marriage, and all my stuff fit into 3 suitcases. That should have told me something right there. Everything else in that house, the fancy furniture, the art on the walls, the kitchen gadgets we'd never used, all of it was Clarissa's. Or her family's money, anyway. I looked around one last time at the marble countertops she'd insisted we needed, the spa tub she'd had installed in the master bathroom, the dining room table that seated 12 people we never invited over, and felt absolutely nothing. Let her have it all. Let her keep the mortgage payments on a house that felt more like a showroom than a home. I was done pretending that granite and stainless steel could make up for the lack of warmth in a place. I drove around town for about an hour, not really having a plan. I'd looked at a few apartment listings online, but everything seemed either too expensive for what you got or too depressing to live in. I was stopped at a red light downtown when I noticed the for rent sign in the window above Marge's Bakery. I'd been going there for years. It was one of those places that made real bread and didn't charge you $15 for a sandwich. The kind of place that felt honest. I parked and walked in, and the smell hit me immediately. Fresh bread, cinnamon, something chocolatey in the oven. It smelled like comfort, like the way Mom's kitchen used to smell on Sunday mornings. Marge was behind the counter, a woman probably in her 70s with flour-dusted hands, and the kind of smile that made you feel like you'd just walked into your grandmother's house. "Logan, haven't seen you in a while, honey." The usual. I'd been coming here long enough that she knew my order. Black coffee and whatever pastry looked good that day. But instead of ordering, I found myself asking about the apartment upstairs. "Oh, that little place?" she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and quiet. Bill and I used to rent it to college kids, but we're getting too old to deal with loud music and parties. We'd rather have someone reliable up there now." She called for Bill, who emerged from the back room covered in flour and wearing a grin that matched his wife's. They were one of those couples who'd been married so long they'd started looking alike, both short and round, both with white hair and laugh lines around their eyes. They took me upstairs to look at the place, and it was perfect in its simplicity. 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a living room with windows that looked out over the main street. The furniture was old but comfortable, and everything was spotlessly clean. "We're not looking to make a fortune off this place," Bill said, naming a rent that was about half what I'd been paying for the mortgage on the house. "We just want someone who'll take care of it and won't cause us any headaches." I signed the lease that afternoon and moved in the same day. Marge insisted on bringing up a plate of cookies and a thermos of coffee to christen the place properly. Bill helped me carry my suitcases upstairs, and within an hour, I was officially a resident of downtown, living above a bakery run by 2 people who treated me like family from day one. That first week was weird. I'd wake up to the smell of bread baking and the sound of Marge and Bill chatting with customers downstairs. It was like living inside a Norman Rockwell painting. Except Norman Rockwell probably never painted a guy who'd just blown up his marriage and was trying to figure out what the hell came next. I went to work every day like nothing had happened, but I felt like I was moving through fog. My coworkers knew something was up, but I wasn't ready to talk about it. How do you explain that your wife chose her brother's birthday party over your mother's funeral? How do you tell people that your marriage ended not with a bang, but with a text message calling you emotional? So I threw myself into code instead. I'd always been good with software, but now it became my refuge. I'd come home from my day job and work on my own projects until 2 or 3 in the morning, losing myself in the clean logic of programming where problems had solutions and everything made sense if you just thought about it hard enough. I changed my phone number on day 3. It felt dramatic, but I needed the quiet. I needed space to think without worrying about what messages might be waiting for me. The only people who got the new number were my boss, a couple of close friends, and Marge and Bill downstairs. The joint bank accounts were next. I called the bank and froze everything. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. I needed to know where I stood financially, needed to disentangle 8 years of shared expenses and figure out what belonged to who. My lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Janet who'd handled Mom's will, walked me through the process. Texas was a community property state, which meant everything we'd acquired during the marriage was technically half mine. But honestly, I didn't want half of anything that reminded me of Clarissa. "You sure about this?" Janet asked when I told her I just wanted out clean. That house alone is worth a considerable amount. I'm sure, I said. I just want to be done. The funny thing was, I wasn't hiding. I went to the same coffee shop I'd always gone to, shopped at the same grocery store, kept the same routines. I just wasn't available for drama anymore. I wasn't available for explanations or justifications or attempts to make me feel guilty for expecting basic human decency from my spouse. Marge and Bill became my anchors during those first few weeks. They'd invite me down for dinner sometimes, never prying, but always letting me know I was welcome. Marge would send me upstairs with leftover soup or a slice of pie, always with the instruction to make sure you eat something, honey. Bill would update me on the neighborhood gossip and tell me stories about the bakery's history, how they'd built it from nothing over 40 years ago. They were showing me what a real partnership looked like. Two people who supported each other, who showed up for each other, who'd weathered 4 decades of life together and still genuinely enjoyed each other's company. They were everything Clarissa and I had never been. 3 weeks after I moved in, I was sitting by my window with a cup of coffee, watching the street below, when I realized something. I felt lighter. The constant tension I'd been carrying in my shoulders was gone. I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore, wasn't constantly second-guessing myself or wondering if I was disappointing someone. For the first time in years, I was just existing. Peacefully. I wasn't ready to think about what came next yet, but I was finally ready to stop looking backward. And that felt like progress. The thing about grief is that it doesn't follow any kind of schedule. Some days I'd wake up feeling almost normal, like maybe I was starting to get my shit together, and then I'd smell something that reminded me of Mom's kitchen and spend the next hour sitting on my bathroom floor, crying like a kid who'd lost his favorite toy. But somewhere around the 6-week mark, something shifted. The pain was still there, but it started feeling less like drowning and more like carrying something heavy that I was slowly getting stronger enough to bear. That's when I really threw myself into work. Not just the day job, though I was crushing it there too, but the side project I'd been tinkering with for the past couple of years. It had started as a solution to a problem I'd noticed at my regular job, where I worked for a mid-sized retail chain helping them manage their supply logistics. Their system was a mess of spreadsheets and outdated software that made tracking inventory feel like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. I'd built something better in my spare time, just for the hell of it. A clean, intuitive platform that could track products from warehouse to shelf, predict demand based on seasonal patterns and local preferences, and automatically adjust orders to prevent both overstocking and shortages. It was the kind of thing that made sense to me, logical, efficient, elegant in its simplicity. I'd shown it to my boss a year ago, and he'd been impressed enough to let me implement a pilot version for our company. The results had been pretty spectacular. We cut waste by 30% in the first quarter, improved delivery times, and somehow managed to keep popular items in stock without drowning in excess inventory of stuff nobody wanted. Word had gotten around the industry, and I'd started getting calls from other companies wanting to know more about our secret sauce. But I never really pushed it. Part of me had been too comfortable in my regular routine, too focused on maintaining the peace at home with Clarissa to rock the boat by starting something that might require more time and attention. Another part of me just didn't think I was the kind of guy who started companies. That was for MBAs and trust fund kids, and people who wore expensive suits to networking events. Now, though, sitting in my little apartment above the bakery with nothing but time and a burning need to channel my energy into something meaningful, I started looking at that software with fresh eyes. What if I could scale it up? What if instead of just helping one retail chain, I could build something that would help small businesses compete with the big guys? I spent entire weekends mapping out the possibilities. The big chain stores had armies of analysts and sophisticated systems that small business owners could never afford. But what if I could democratize that? What if a mom-and-pop hardware store could have the same kind of inventory intelligence as Home Depot? What if a local bookstore could predict demand and manage suppliers as efficiently as Amazon? The more I thought about it, the more excited I got. This wasn't just about building better software. It was about leveling the playing field. It was about giving the little guys the tools they needed to survive in a world that seemed designed to crush them under the weight of corporate efficiency. I started working 18-hour days. I'd come home from my regular job, grab whatever Marge had left for me in the bakery's kitchen, and code until my eyes couldn't focus anymore. Weekends became 48-hour coding marathons fueled by coffee and the kind of obsessive focus that only comes when you've found something that feels like your life's work. Bill would check on me sometimes, bringing up a sandwich or just making sure I hadn't died at my computer. "You're working awful hard up there, son," he'd say, and I'd try to explain what I was building, but it was hard to put into words. How do you tell someone that you're trying to build something that would honor your mother's memory by helping regular people succeed? How do you explain that every line of code felt like a small act of rebellion against a world that had taught you to value appearance over substance? 3 months after moving in above the bakery, I had a working prototype. I called it TrueFlow because that's what it was designed to do. Create true, efficient flow of goods from suppliers to customers without all the waste and confusion that plagued most small businesses. The name felt right, honest, like something Mom would have approved of. I started testing it with a few local businesses. Maria, who ran a small grocery store 2 blocks away, was my first beta user. Her inventory management had been a nightmare of handwritten lists and gut instincts, and she was constantly either running out of popular items or stuck with cases of stuff that expired before she could sell it. Within a month of implementing TrueFlow, her waste dropped by 40%. She was able to predict which items to stock up on before weekend rushes, and she stopped losing money on products that sat on shelves until they went bad. More importantly, she had time to focus on customer service instead of constantly scrambling to figure out what to order next. Word spread the way it does in small business communities, quietly but quickly. The owner of the hardware store started using it. Then the guy who ran the independent pharmacy. Each success story led to 2 more businesses wanting to try it out. I wasn't trying to get rich. I was charging just enough to cover my costs and maybe put a little aside for improvements. This was about proving something to myself, about building something that mattered, about turning the worst period of my life into something productive. Late at night, when the bakery was quiet and the street was empty, I'd sit at my computer fine-tuning algorithms and adding features, and for the first time since Mom died, I felt like I was doing something she would have been proud of. Not because it was flashy or impressive, but because it was useful. Because it helped people. I thought about all those nights she'd come home exhausted from the hospital, but still find energy to help me with homework or listen to me complain about some problem that seemed huge at the time. She taught me that the best work was work that made other people's lives a little bit easier, a little bit better. TrueFlow was becoming that kind of work. Quiet, steady, meaningful. And as winter turned to spring in my little apartment above the bakery, I started to think that maybe I was finally becoming the kind of man she'd raised me to be. I woke up that Tuesday morning the same way I'd been waking up for the past 6 months, to the smell of fresh bread from downstairs and the sound of Marge humming while she prepped for the morning rush. My phone was buzzing on the nightstand, which was weird because it was barely 6:30 and the only people who had my number knew I wasn't exactly a morning person. I figured it was probably a spam call and almost ignored it, but something made me check. 47 missed calls, 63 text messages, and my email inbox looked like it had exploded overnight. The first text was from my buddy Jake, who worked in tech journalism. "Dude, what the hell? Why didn't you tell me?" The second was from my old college roommate, Logan Pierce. "That Logan Pierce? Holy shit, man." Then there was one from my boss at the retail chain. "We need to talk. Today." I scrolled through more messages, getting more confused by the minute, until I found one with a link attached. The preview showed what looked like a news headline, but I couldn't make out the full text on my phone screen. I clicked it, and the page loaded slowly, like the universe was building up suspense for the moment that would change everything. Local software developer startup becomes overnight billion-dollar unicorn. I stared at that headline for probably a full minute, reading it over and over, waiting for the words to make sense. Then I saw the subheading. Ex-husband of socialite Clarissa Benton Pierce launches TrueFlow, attracting massive investment from global venture capital firm. What the actual hell? I kept reading, and slowly the pieces started falling into place. Apparently, while I'd been quietly building TrueFlow and testing it with local businesses, word had been spreading through channels I didn't even know existed. Some venture capital firm called Meridian Partners, the kind of company that invested in the next Googles and Facebooks, had been tracking small logistics companies, and somehow TrueFlow had ended up on their radar. The article mentioned that they'd been watching my platform's performance metrics through some kind of industry analytics service I'd never heard of. The 40% waste reduction at Maria's grocery store, the efficiency improvements at the hardware store, the success stories that had seemed so small and local to me. Apparently, they'd added up to something that looked really impressive when you crunched the numbers across multiple businesses. Meridian had reached out to my lawyer, Janet, 3 weeks ago. She'd been trying to get in touch with me, but I'd been so buried in code that I'd been ignoring most of my calls and emails. When I didn't respond, they'd made what the article called an unprecedented unsolicited offer for 40% of TrueFlow, valuing the company at $2.8 billion. $2.8 billion. For software I'd built in my pajamas above a bakery. Janet had apparently accepted the offer on my behalf, using the power of attorney I'd given her to handle my divorce proceedings. Which meant that as of yesterday, I was suddenly worth over $1 billion and owned 60% of what was now being called the most promising logistics startup since Uber. I sat on the edge of my bed in my boxers and an old t-shirt, staring at my phone, trying to process what I was reading. The article went on to talk about how TrueFlow was revolutionizing supply chain management for small and medium businesses and how Meridian Partners believed it could democratize logistics intelligence in ways that could fundamentally alter the retail landscape. There were quotes from Maria talking about how the software had saved her business. There was analysis from industry experts saying that TrueFlow represented the future of inventory management. There were projections about market penetration and growth potential that made my head spin. And then, buried about halfway through the article, was the part that made me understand why my phone had been blowing up since dawn. Pierce was previously married to Clarissa Benton Pierce, daughter of prominent financier Arthur Benton and a fixture in the city's social scene. The couple divorced last year under undisclosed circumstances. They'd found the connection. The tech press, the business journals, the gossip blogs. They'd all put together that the guy who'd just become a billionaire overnight was the same guy who'd been married to one of the city's most visible socialites. And now it was everywhere. I scrolled through more articles, and each one seemed to add more details. Reclusive tech genius emerges from divorce to build logistics empire. From marital split to market disruption, the Logan Pierce story. Billionaire bachelor, the rise of TrueFlow's mysterious founder. Some of them had photos. Old pictures from company events where Clarissa and I had posed together, looking like the perfect successful couple. Seeing those images felt like looking at strangers, like that had been a different life lived by different people. My phone started ringing again, and this time I recognized the number. It was Janet. "Logan, thank God," she said when I picked up. "I've been trying to reach you for hours. We need to talk." "Janet, what the hell happened? Why didn't you tell me about this Meridian thing?" "I tried. I sent you emails, left voicemails, even stopped by the bakery twice. But Marge said you were working and didn't want to be disturbed. The offer had a 48-hour deadline, and given the amount we're talking about, I made an executive decision to protect your interests. I should have been angry, but honestly, I was mostly just stunned. Janet had been handling my divorce proceedings, dealing with property division and asset protection, and she'd probably seen this as another business decision that needed to be made quickly. "How much?" I asked. "The initial payment was $1.1 billion. Cash. It hit your account yesterday morning. $1.1 billion. I was sitting in a rented apartment above a bakery, wearing yesterday's clothes, and I was apparently worth more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes." "Logan, there's something else," Janet said, and her voice had that careful tone lawyers use when they're about to deliver news you're not going to like. "The story's everywhere now. Your phone's probably been ringing all morning." That was an understatement. As we talked, I could see more calls coming in, more texts appearing. My email was still climbing. Reporters, old friends, business contacts I hadn't heard from in years, people I'd never heard of at all. "What do I need to know?" I asked. "Well," Janet said, "Clarissa's side of the family has been calling my office all morning. Her mother, her father, even that brother of hers. They all want to discuss the situation. The brother, Ryan, the guy whose 31st birthday party had been more important than my mother's funeral. And Clarissa? She's called 14 times since 7 a.m. Left 2 voicemails asking if you'd be willing to meet for coffee to talk things through." I laughed, and it came out sounding bitter even to my own ears. 6 months ago, when I'd needed my wife to show up for the worst day of my life, she'd been too busy with cake and party planning. Now that the newspapers were calling me a billionaire, Suddenly, she wanted to have coffee and talk things through. Tell them all the same thing, I said. No, Logan. No, Janet. I mean it. No meetings, no coffee, no talking things through. I'm not interested in anything they have to say. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, listening to the sounds of the bakery coming to life downstairs. Marge and Bill chatting with early customers, the espresso machine hissing, the bell above the door chiming as people came and went. It was the same peaceful soundtrack that had been helping me heal for the past 6 months, but now everything felt different. I was a billionaire. I owned 60% of a company that was apparently going to change the world. And the woman who'd chosen party balloons over my grief was suddenly very interested in having a conversation. For the first time since Mom died, I laughed until my sides hurt. The first week after the news broke was like living in some kind of weird alternate reality. I'd go downstairs for my usual coffee and Danish, and instead of the comfortable morning routine I'd grown to love, there would be reporters camped outside the bakery, photographers trying to get shots through the windows, and random people showing up claiming to be old friends who wanted to catch up. Marge and Bill handled it like champs, firmly but politely telling everyone that I wasn't available for comment and that they needed to move along if they weren't buying pastries. That boy's been through enough, I heard Marge tell one particularly persistent reporter. He lost his mama and his marriage in the same year, and now y'all want to treat him like some circus act. Have some decency. I loved that woman more every day. My new routine became sneaking out the back entrance and working from coffee shops across town, using my laptop to manage the flood of emails and requests that kept pouring in. Business proposals, investment opportunities, interview requests from every tech publication you could name, and about 50 invitations to speak at conferences. It was overwhelming as hell, but also kind of fascinating to see how quickly the world wanted to treat me like I was some kind of business genius instead of just a guy who'd built something useful while trying to keep his head above water. The calls from Clarissa's family kept coming too. Her mother left increasingly desperate voicemails, going from casual, "we should catch up" messages to barely veiled attempts to guilt me into responding. Her father called my lawyer's office 3 times in one day, apparently trying to set up some kind of business meeting. But it was the email from Ryan that actually made me stop and pay attention. It came on a Thursday evening while I was sitting in a little diner about 20 minutes from downtown, trying to enjoy a burger and fries without someone pointing a camera at me. The subject line was simple. "I'm sorry. Logan," it started. "I know you probably don't want to hear from any of us right now, and I completely understand why. But I need you to know something about that day, Mom's funeral day. I need you to know that I never asked Clarissa to stay for my birthday party. In fact, I specifically told her she should go be with you." I put down my burger and kept reading. "When she told me about your mom passing away, I said she needed to get to the hospital immediately. I told her my birthday could wait, that you were her husband and that's where she belonged. She said she'd already talked to you and that you'd told her to stay for the party. She said you were handling things fine and would prefer to deal with the arrangements alone." My stomach dropped. Even now, even after everything, Clarissa had managed to surprise me with a new level of selfishness. I believed her because why wouldn't I? But when I saw the news articles this week and realized you two had gotten divorced right after that, I started putting pieces together. "Logan, I'm so fucking sorry. I should have pushed harder. I should have called you myself. I should have known she was lying." The email went on for several more paragraphs, but the gist was clear. Ryan had been as much a victim of Clarissa's manipulation as I had. He'd spent the last 6 months thinking I hadn't wanted my wife at my mother's funeral, while I'd spent the same 6 months thinking he'd been more important to her than her grieving husband. "I know this doesn't change anything," the email concluded, "but I wanted you to know the truth. And I wanted you to know that if I'd understood what was really happening, I would have driven her to that hospital myself. Your mom sounded like an incredible woman, and I'm sorry I never got the chance to meet her." I sat in that diner booth for a long time, staring at Ryan's email and trying to process this new information. Part of me felt vindicated. I'd been right about Clarissa's priorities all along. But another part of me just felt tired. Even her brother's apology couldn't undo the damage that had been done, couldn't bring back those months of marriage that had been built on lies and misplaced values. I didn't reply to Ryan's email. Not because I was angry at him, but because I was finally done relitigating the past. His apology was genuine, and I appreciated it, but it didn't change the fundamental truth. Clarissa had made her choice that day, and it hadn't been me. 2 days later, she showed up at my office. I'd rented a small space downtown to serve as TrueFlow's official headquarters. Nothing fancy, just a converted warehouse with good internet and enough room for the handful of employees I was planning to hire. I was there on a Saturday morning, enjoying the quiet and trying to map out our expansion strategy, when the security system chimed, and I looked up to see Clarissa walking through the front door. She looked exactly the same and completely different at the same time. Same perfectly styled hair, same expensive clothes, same carefully applied makeup that made her look like she'd stepped out of a magazine. But there was something desperate in her eyes, something frantic in the way she moved, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me that she belonged here. "Logan," she said, and her voice had that breathy quality she used when she was trying to be charming. "I'm so glad I found you. I've been trying to reach you for days." I leaned back in my chair and studied her for a moment. 6 months ago, seeing her would have been devastating. 3 months ago, it would have made me angry. Now, looking at her standing in my office in her designer dress and her practiced smile, I mostly just felt nothing. "Security let you up?" I asked. "I told them I was your wife," she said, and had the grace to look embarrassed about the lie. "Logan, we need to talk." "No," I said, turning back to my computer. "We really don't. Please." She moved closer to my desk, and I could smell her perfume. The same expensive stuff she'd always worn, the scent that used to make me think of home and now just reminded me of everything I'd lost. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but I need you to understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "You chose your brother's birthday party over your husband's mother's funeral. End of story." "It wasn't like that," she said, and there were actual tears in her eyes now. Real ones, not the calculated kind she used to get her way. I didn't think she was really gone. I thought maybe she was just in the hospital, that there would be time to. "Stop." I stood up and walked around the desk, not to get closer to her, but to move toward the door. "Just stop, Clarissa. I don't want to hear your explanations, or your excuses, or your reasons. I don't want to hear how it wasn't really your fault, or how you didn't understand, or how you've changed." She was crying for real now, mascara starting to smudge despite whatever waterproof formula she was using. "Logan, please. I love you. I've always loved you." "No," I said, holding the door open. "You loved the idea of me. You loved having a husband who didn't embarrass you at parties. You loved the security and the companionship and the social acceptability of being married. But you never loved me enough to show up when it mattered." "I made a mistake," she whispered. "You made a choice," I corrected. "And now I'm making mine." I called security, and they escorted her out gently but firmly. Through the office windows, I watched her walk to her car, probably her father's car, knowing the Bentons, and sit there for a few minutes before driving away. That was the last time I saw Clarissa Pierce. And honestly, it felt like saying goodbye to a stranger. The Sunday after Clarissa's surprise office visit, I was downstairs in the bakery helping Bill move some heavy flour sacks when Marge introduced me to someone who would change everything all over again, but this time in the best possible way. "Logan, honey, I want you to meet my niece," Marge said, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. "This is Sabrina." The woman standing next to the display case looked nothing like the polished, high-maintenance women I'd grown accustomed to during my marriage. Sabrina was maybe 30, with shoulder-length brown hair that looked like she'd run her fingers through it instead of spending an hour styling it. She wore jeans and a faded t-shirt advertising some local farmer's market, and when she smiled, it reached her eyes in a way that felt completely genuine. "Nice to finally meet you," she said, extending a hand that had dirt under the fingernails, not in a gross way, but in a way that suggested she actually worked with her hands for a living. "Aunt Marge talks about you constantly. I was starting to think you were some kind of mythical creature who lived upstairs and survived entirely on coffee and pastries." I laughed, and it felt good. Natural. When was the last time someone had made me laugh without trying too hard or performing for some invisible audience? "Sabrina runs a little organic produce business," Marge explained, beaming with pride. "Supplies restaurants all over the city with the most beautiful vegetables you've ever seen." "It's not exactly a business," Sabrina said, looking embarrassed. "More like me and my beat-up truck making deliveries to anyone who'll buy from a single mom with more ambition than sense." There it was, single mom. I found myself curious rather than deterred. How old is your kid? Jordan's 8, she said, and her whole face lit up. He's at soccer practice right now, which is why I have time to visit normal humans instead of spending my Saturday afternoon explaining why we can't get a puppy for the 15th time this week. We ended up talking for 2 hours. Not about business or money or appearances, but about real stuff. She told me about starting her produce business after her ex-husband left when Jordan was 3, how she'd turned a passion for gardening into something that barely paid the bills, but made her feel proud of the work she was doing. She talked about the challenges of sourcing quality organic produce from local farms, the logistics of coordinating deliveries, the frustration of trying to compete with big distributors who could undercut her prices but couldn't match her quality. I found myself telling her about TrueFlow, but not the billion-dollar unicorn version that was all over the tech blogs. I told her about the real version. The software I'd built to help small businesses like hers manage their supply chains more efficiently. She listened with genuine interest, asking smart questions about how it could help someone in her situation. The biggest problem I have, she said, is predicting demand. Some weeks I've got restaurants calling me desperate for more tomatoes, and other weeks I'm trying to give away perfectly good produce because I ordered too much. That's when I knew I'd found something special, not just in Sabrina herself, but in what we could build together. Here was someone who understood what TrueFlow was really about, not disrupting markets or generating shareholder value, but helping real people run better businesses. What if I told you I could help with that? I asked. 3 weeks later, Sabrina's Organic Harvest became the first official partner of TrueFlow's new agricultural division. I helped her implement systems that could predict restaurant demand based on seasonal patterns, coordinate with local farms to optimize planting schedules, and streamline her delivery routes to reduce waste and improve efficiency. But more than that, I met Jordan, a gap-toothed 8-year-old who was obsessed with soccer and comic books and asked approximately 4,000 questions per hour about everything from why the sky was blue to whether I thought aliens played soccer on other planets. The first time he stayed overnight at the bakery while Sabrina handled an emergency delivery, he knocked on my apartment door at 7 in the morning to ask if I wanted to see his Pokemon card collection. Sitting on my living room floor, listening to Jordan explain the intricate battle mechanics of creatures I'd never heard of, I realized something profound. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Not perfect, not polished, just real and warm and wonderfully uncomplicated. 6 months into working with Sabrina, I made a decision that felt like the most natural thing in the world, even though it represented a complete departure from everything I'd thought I wanted out of life. I invested $2 million in her organic produce business, not as some kind of charity or grand gesture, but because I genuinely believed in what she was building and wanted to be part of it. We transformed Sabrina's Organic Harvest from a one-woman operation with a beat-up truck into something that could actually compete with the big distributors. We bought better vehicles, hired 3 full-time drivers, and expanded her network of partner farms across Texas. But the real magic happened when we launched True Harvest, a specialized branch of TrueFlow designed specifically for connecting local farmers directly to small restaurants and grocery stores. The system we built was beautiful in its simplicity. Farmers could upload their planting schedules and expected yields, restaurants could input their seasonal menu plans and projected needs, and True Harvest would coordinate everything in between. No more wasted produce rotting in fields because there wasn't a market for it. No more restaurants scrambling to find quality ingredients at the last minute. Within 6 months, we were operating in 17 states. Not because we were trying to build some massive corporate empire, but because word spread organically from one satisfied customer to another. Chefs started calling us directly, asking if we could connect them with farmers in their region. Small grocery stores began reaching out, wanting to offer locally sourced produce to their customers without the headache of managing dozens of individual supplier relationships. My old life felt like something that had happened to someone else. The marble countertops, the country club memberships, the dinner parties where everyone competed to see who could name-drop the most important connections, all of it seemed ridiculous now. I'd traded fancy restaurants for family dinners at Marge and Bill's kitchen table. I'd swapped networking events for Saturday morning soccer games, cheering for Jordan from the sidelines alongside parents who worked real jobs and worried about real problems. The day Clarissa's latest attempt to reconnect arrived, a gift basket full of expensive wines and artisanal cheeses. I barely glanced at it before handing it to one of my employees to take home to their family. I didn't need apologies wrapped in ribbon and delivered by courier. I had something infinitely more valuable, a life built on substance instead of appearances, relationships based on genuine care instead of social positioning. That evening, I sat on my apartment balcony watching Sabrina help Jordan with his homework at one of the bakery's outdoor tables below. The sound of their laughter drifted up through my open window, mixing with the comfortable noise of downtown life. And I felt a contentment I'd never experienced during all those years of chasing what I'd thought success was supposed to look like. The Austin Tech Summit was supposed to be a routine speaking engagement, 20 minutes on stage talking about sustainable business practices and how technology could serve communities instead of just shareholders. I've been doing more of these events lately, not because I enjoyed being in the spotlight, but because people seemed genuinely interested in hearing about a different approach to building companies. The organizers had positioned my talk right after lunch, when half the audience would probably be checking their phones and thinking about coffee. What I didn't expect was to see Arthur Benton sitting in the third row, his arms crossed, and his jaw set in that particular way that meant he was spoiling for a fight. My presentation went well enough. I talked about True Harvest, about the importance of building systems that actually helped real people instead of just extracting value from them. I shared stories about the farmers we worked with, the restaurants that had been able to expand their local sourcing thanks to better logistics, the small grocery stores that were now competing effectively with big chains. The audience seemed engaged, asking thoughtful questions about scalability and implementation. But the whole time, I could feel Arthur's glare burning into me from the audience. After my talk, I was heading toward the exit when he intercepted me near the coffee station. Arthur Benton in person was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd spent his entire career in high-stakes finance. Perfectly tailored suit, silver hair styled just so, and the kind of presence that was used to commanding attention in boardrooms. "Pierce," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "We need to talk." "No," I replied, continuing toward the door. "We really don't." He followed me, lowering his voice but not his intensity. "You humiliated our family. Clarissa is devastated, and frankly, your behavior has been completely inappropriate given everything she's done for you over the years." I stopped walking and turned to face him. The lobby was full of tech executives and entrepreneurs, people who lived and breathed innovation and disruption. And here was this relic from an older world trying to intimidate me with the same old power plays that probably worked on people who cared about his opinion. "Everything she's done for me," I repeated, keeping my voice calm and level. "Like skipping my mother's funeral to attend a birthday party? Like that kind of support." Arthur's face reddened slightly, but he pressed on. "You're being vindictive. You've turned this into some kind of public spectacle, and it needs to stop." The conversation around us had started to quiet down as people realized they were witnessing some kind of confrontation. I could see phones being discreetly pointed in our direction, probably recording every word. "Mr. Benton," I said, loud enough for the nearby crowd to hear clearly, "your daughter chose not to show up during her husband's darkest hour. That's not my fault, and it's not my responsibility to manage the consequences of her choices." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in front of an audience that had just witnessed a very public demonstration of what happened when old money entitlement ran up against someone who no longer needed to pretend it mattered. Behind me, I heard him call out something about making this right, but I didn't turn around. I wasn't there to fight with ghosts from my past. I was there to talk about building meaningful systems that served real people, and I'd done exactly that. Today I'm sitting on the back porch of a house I never imagined I'd own, watching Jordan practice his free kicks in the yard, while Sabrina tends to the vegetable garden she insisted on planting despite my protests that we could just buy organic produce from our own suppliers. The house is nothing fancy. A modest 3-bedroom place about 20 minutes outside Austin with good bones and enough land for a kid to run around without bothering the neighbors. It's been 2 years since that confrontation with Arthur Benton, and honestly, I barely think about that old life anymore. True Harvest is still growing, but at a pace that makes sense rather than the breakneck speed that venture capital firms usually demand. We're profitable, we're helping people, and most importantly, I'm not working myself to death anymore. I've got competent people running the day-to-day operations, which means I can actually be present for the life I'm building instead of just funding it. Weekends have become sacred. Saturday mornings mean pancakes with Marge and Bill, who've basically adopted Jordan as their great-grandson and spoil him accordingly. Sunday afternoons are for soccer games, where I've somehow become the guy who brings orange slices and cheers loud enough to embarrass Jordan in the best possible way. Evenings are for homework help, family dinners, and the kind of quiet domesticity that would have bored me senseless 5 years ago, but now feels like the most important work I've ever done. Last month, Jordan asked me if I missed being married to Clarissa. The question came out of nowhere while we were building a model airplane together, the kind of random curiosity that 8-year-olds specialize in. Not even a little bit. I told him, and meant it completely. Sometimes I visit Mom's grave. The cemetery is peaceful this time of year, and I always bring her favorite daisies from Sabrina's garden. I tell her about Jordan's latest soccer victory, about Sabrina's new contract with a restaurant chain in Dallas, about how Marge is teaching me to bake bread on Sunday mornings. I finally found people who show up when it matters, Mom, I said during my last visit, kneeling beside her headstone in the morning sunshine. Just like you always did. And I know, with the kind of certainty that comes from hard-won wisdom, that she'd be proud of the man I've become. Not because of the money or the business success, but because I finally learned the difference between building a life and just maintaining an image. I didn't just walk away from a bad marriage. I walked into a better life, surrounded by people who understand that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect appearances. It's about showing up, day after day, for the people who matter most.